So all this meant that ultimately I achieved a for my second year at Cambridge with a final score of and a final rank of in the year. So I've recently finished my second year at the University of Cambridge studying economics, and in this video I'm going to do a complete review of what the whole year was like. So this is going to include the papers I sat, the number of lectures I attended, the content of those lectures, the whole examination process, my marks and rank for each paper, and my overall class, mark, and rank. So this year I sat 4 papers. The first 3, Microeconomics, Macroeconomics, and Econometrics, were compulsory. And then the final paper, Labour Markets, was optional. And then in terms of the relative importance of these 4 papers, they are all weighted equally in determining my final mark and grade. So the first term of microeconomics consisted of 20 hours of lectures on game theory, welfare, and applications. And then the second term was another 20 hours of lectures on the economics of uncertainty and information. I personally found both terms really interesting and believe the course as a whole was lectured really well. And then this paper was assessed with a single 3-hour exam at the end of the entire year. The exam consisted of 8 possible questions, 4 based on the content from the first term and 4 based on the content of the second term. And then students were required to answer 4 of the 8 questions, answering at least 1 question from each of these 2 sections. Basically what that means is you can't just answer 4 questions all from the content of 1 term. You have to vary it at least a little bit. In the exam I answered 2 questions from each section, and these are the marks I achieved on those 4 questions: 75, 82, 65 and 70. And then as all the questions were weighted evenly, this gave me a final mark for microeconomics of 73 and ranked me 21st in the year. So the first term of macroeconomics was 16 hours of lectures, of which 8 hours were focused on intertemporal macroeconomics and another 8 hours were focused on unemployment and labour markets. The second term then had 20 hours of lectures, with the first 12 hours focused on monetary economics and the final 8 hours focused on international macroeconomics. Like microeconomics, I believe this course was taught very well, and I personally preferred the second term of content. And again, like microeconomics, this paper was assessed with a single 3-hour exam at the end of the year. And like the other exams I sat, they were all closed book. However, compared to the microeconomics paper, the macroeconomics paper had a slightly different structure. So this paper was split up into 2 parts, Part A and Part B. And as someone taking the test, you are advised to spend equal amounts of time on both sections. Part A consisted of 4 short questions, where each question was focused on one individual topic of the course. That is, 1 question was on intertemporal macroeconomics, 1 question was on unemployment and labour markets, 1 question was on monetary economics, and then the final question was on international macroeconomics. And because you had an hour and a half roughly for this first section, you're spending about 22.5 minutes on each question. Part B then consisted of a long question and an essay. For the long question, you had to answer 1 from a choice of 2, where 1 question was focused on the first term's content and the other question was focused on the second term's content. In my exam, I chose a long question from the second term's content on the Bernanke-Blinder model, which is part of monetary economics. And then the essay, you had a choice of 4 different questions, and like the short questions, there was 1 from each different part of the course. And I personally chose to do the essay, which was about intertemporal macroeconomics. So a bit confusing, but that's how the paper is structured, and then here are the marks I achieved. So in the 4 short questions, I got 70, 67, 74, and 52. Giving me an overall score of a 66 for Part A of the exam. And then in the long question and the essay, I got a 71 and a 69 respectively, giving me an overall score of 70 for Part B of the exam. And as Part A and Part B are weighted evenly, this gave me an overall mark of 68 and ranked me 44th in the year. So the first term of econometrics consists of 16 hours of lectures focused on cross-sectional data, and the second term is another 16 hours of lectures focused on panel data and time series. In my personal opinion, the course was taught slightly less well than microeconomics and macroeconomics. Furthermore, the paper was assessed slightly different to the other 2 papers. So this paper was assessed in 2 different parts, the first part being a 13-day project at the start of the final term, and the second part being a 2-hour closed book exam at the end of the year. The first part, that is the 13-day project, was weighted at 40%, and then the exam was weighted at 60%. For the project, you had to answer 1 of 4 possible questions. The aim of this project was to test your use of data and then producing a final paper answering that question. The question I chose was focused on the persistence of the gender pay gap in the US. And then for the exam itself, it was split into 2 different parts. The first part consisted of 5 questions relating to cross-sectional and panel data, and then the second part consisted of 2 questions related to time series data. So out of these 7 possible questions, you had to answer 4 in total, answering at least 1 from each section. In the project, I didn't do as well. I achieved a 64, which ranked me 94th in the year. But then in the exam, in the 4 questions I chose to do, I achieved an 88, an 82, an 85, and a 75. This led to a final exam score of 83, ranking me 9th in the year. So combining these 2 elements of the project and the exam, this left me with a final score of 75 and a final rank of 33rd in the year. The first term of the labour markets paper was 16 hours of lectures focused on labour supply, labour demand, human capital theory, and mobility. The second term was then another 16 hours of lectures focused on job search, signalling theory, and family structure. I believe this paper was taught well, but again, probably not as well as the microeconomics and macroeconomics papers. Like the first 2 papers, this labour markets paper was again assessed by a 3-hour closed book exam at the end of the year. The exam consisted of 6 questions in total. 3 focused on the content from the first term, and the other 3 focused on the content from the second term. Of those 6 questions, you had to answer 4 in total, answering 2 from each section, i.e. 2 questions focused on the first term's content and 2 questions focused on the second term's content. In this exam, my marks for the 4 questions I chose to do were 88, 68, 73, and 62. This meant that in total I achieved a 73, ranking me 6th in the year. So all this meant that ultimately I achieved a first for my second year at Cambridge with a final score of 72.25 and a final rank of 18th in the year. And that's it. I hope you found this video interesting or insightful. Please feel free to leave any comments if you have any questions, and as always, thank you for watching.